started was after I had appeared on Simply Quilts for the first time. And I was really just starting to do quilting as a business and moving into being a professional art quilter. And I think that's kind of where we had left off.
World of this, what changes did you make, or how did it alter how you do your work?
I don't know if it necessarily altered how I did my work, but I think I had to look at my work in a different way. I had to make it more accessible to a larger audience. You know, when you're making art for yourself, it's different than when you're trying to make a living at that art, that same art. And not, you know, you want to find that balance where you're still doing what you love and still being able to make a living at it. And I think part of the reason why I pursued creating a book came out of that, the desire to try and have it make more of my living and make my name a little bit more accessible to the larger quilting audience that's out there. And I love to teach, so that was kind of a natural fit for me as well. So that kind of led me into, you know, the lecturing and the teaching that I do, and creating the book, which, you know, is totally focused on my method of how I put my quilts together, which is the fast piece applique. See, that book came out in 2008, so that's the Dream Landscape book. And I'm only sitting here talking to you now because book 2 is ready to be photographed. The first book is doing pretty darn good. I'm liable to say surprised, but I'm not necessarily surprised. I'm just really glad that it is doing really well. It's fun to see people relate to the process, and I think that's the most exciting thing for me, because I don't necessarily want people to do Rose Hughes quilts. I want them to make their own, and that was kind of why it was hard for me to come up and, you know, decide to write the book on the process. But it really enables people to do their own thing, and so when I'm teaching, that's the best part for me, is the method of how they're putting the fabrics together is what I'm offering them. I'm not necessarily offering them, you know, I'm not telling them which fabrics to choose and which ideas to use. Those are totally coming from the students, and so it's really exciting to see the whole process being utilized by so many people. So it's actually doing pretty well. Every day there seems like almost anything you do has to be related to quilting, or is related to quilting for me. So even when I'm out somewhere, and I think this is really true for any artist. I mean, inspiration comes from anywhere at any time, and, you know, being aware and being willing to look sometimes is the most important thing. And so I think it's almost part of every minute of every day, and it's kind of exciting that it is so tightly connected to everything that I do. And the lecturing is a lot of fun. The teaching is even more so, and the books are, you know, they've opened up a lot of things to me that I'd never really been involved with the publishing world before, and so that's opened up a lot of interesting avenues to look at, and it's been kind of fun in that respect as well. The business aspect of my art really has had to take the front seat, but it hasn't, you know, it hasn't taken over the driver's seat yet, and but it has actually, you know, it's moved up to the front, and the things that I do are generally related to, you know, to making quilts and making them accessible and making my living at them. But it's kind of interesting in a way, because it doesn't really change the need to just do it for yourself. It's fun when they connect together, and sometimes they connect on, you know, everything's kind of, you know, hitting, what do they call it on a car when everything's hitting, right? Running on all cylinders or something like that.
Yes.
And sometimes it hits on all cylinders, and sometimes it's, you know, it's sometimes it's missing, but, you know, it picks up again, and then it hits on all the cylinders at the same time. So where you're, you know, creating something that's totally in line with what your, you know, your business is and the art itself. So, but it has been really fun to see all the exhibits, and I'll see the quilts go out into the world and have them be in different places and be exposed to different things. So I show quilts in a variety of different places. There's a couple of galleries that carry my work. And then there's also some shows, and I participate in several different organizations, art organizations related to quilting. One of them is the Studio Art Quilt Association, and they have exhibits that are going on, and I was really involved with them over the last 3 years in their exhibition committee. So that was kind of exciting and fun too. And they show all over the world and have exhibits going on in some of the really big quilt festivals, and some really beautiful exhibits going on in amazing museums in different places all over the country. And so I'm lucky enough to have some of my pieces traveling in some of their exhibits. And I've also participated, actually I started an art group down in Southern California of art quilters called Quilts on the Wall Fiber Artists. And that was actually started in 1996 when I was in the throes of my corporate life and getting ready for my Y2K project that started in 1998. But that also is an incredible group of more of emerging quilt artists, and they have exhibits and travel. And then there's a small group that I exhibit with, and I love to call them my fine feathered friends. There's 4 of us, and we have been friends for a long time, but we are all quilt artists with very, very different styles. And so we usually have at least 1 or 2 shows a year at different galleries that we show in as a group. And if you ask me today how many quilts I have out there, this weekend I have a quilt showing in Houston. I have a quilt showing in Santa Clara, California. I have an exhibit that's moving on to Florida, and that one's a solo exhibit, so that would actually be like 15 different pieces. I have a gallery show in some place in Southern California right now, which is up for the next 3 months as part of a group exhibit at the Muckenthaler Cultural Center. And then I also have another gallery opening, next month as well. I just don't know how I'm going to ever keep track. I had to buy a 5-year calendar. That was the scary thing. A 5-year calendar. Well, it's interesting that you called it a boundary, because it definitely feels like a boundary. When you're out there making art is something that's very personal, and as I said before, it's something you get inspired to do almost at any time. And when you have other commitments, when you have the business of the art coming into play, and you have commitments that you have to fulfill, because it is just like any other business, and if you agree to do something, you darn well better be there to do it. I know that sometimes when I have really great ideas that I really want to do for myself, I'm always looking for the place that I can incorporate them into something that I might have coming up that I've committed to, but that doesn't always work out, and sometimes you just have to be glad that I was a project manager and be glad that the time is my own, and that it is 24 hours in a day, and maybe, that the studio is mine and I can walk into it anytime I want. And so, but it is hard sometimes to find the balance, and sometimes, like I said, sometimes it all clicks on all cylinders, and sometimes, there's 1 or 2 missing, and you just have to make it work. I had been really thinking about whether or not the studio in my home was a good thing this year. And I know there's a lot of people that say you need to go someplace else and have your studio be someplace else. And I think it really depends on the type of person you are. I know that having a studio someplace else wouldn't necessarily make me go and work, because it's never been one of my issues. I've always worked just fine from home. Again, I think it was the corporate, you have to be appreciative of all the things you learned in the corporate world, and being that project manager probably helps, the things that are important to you, you can find the time for, and you find how to do them. And I think having the studio there is actually a benefit to me. So I like having my studio in my house that I can just walk into at any time. Something that whether I sleep or not has been asked to me by many people, because I am pretty prolific. But the reality is I do sleep. And maybe that's because it is in my house, because it's, it's right there. So I know when I get up, because I am a crack of dawn person. And so when I'm up at the crack of dawn, it's there and I can start in on my day, that I don't have to go anywhere. And I do actually, I'll confess here that I like to work in my PJs and keep the cats around. If I had the studio somewhere else, the cats would have to move back and forth with me because they are in an inaugural place. That's who I have. I have one cat who is my assistant and one cat who is my receptionist, and they would feel left out. That's their paid jobs. Something, the Raven thing is very, very important to me still after all these years. I had a friend of mine, when I first started making quilts with ravens on them, she told me that one day I would, just know that I'd have had enough. And that day hasn't happened. And as it turns out, there's a couple of exhibits that I participate in as an invitee for invitationals that are annual commitments. And I've actually been able to have those pieces be my Raven pieces. And so I do get to actually still create those, and they are still special to me.
Yeah. I know we talked about the Raven before, what it means to you, and do we want to update what the Raven means to you and why it's your, it's just, okay. On a totally different tack.
Okay.
How do you market your quilts? I want to go towards Twitter, blogs, all that kind of stuff, and how that is part of your business and has become part of your business. That's when I ask that question, that's where I'm heading. So, but you can do whatever you want with it.
Well, the technology that's come out recently has been very inviting. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's many others that I could sit here and name. And I have to admit, and there's blogging, and I have to admit that my website just recently celebrated its 10th year of being in existence, and I had to go back and, didn't really change so much of the content or so much of the visuals of but I had to change how it all worked. So much of the technology behind the scenes had changed, allowing much easier access. And so I've had some friends within the business, the art business, and the quilting business, and they've all been saying, well, you need to do this and you need to do that, and you need, and I've really, really fought it. I fought it for a long time. And I do have a very dear quilting friend who lives where I live in the Long Beach area, and she actually owns a fabric company, and so we get together for breakfast, at least once a month, and that's kind of our getting together. It's also a great marketing tool. And she kind of came to breakfast one day and said, you have to do a blog. And this was probably about a year and a half ago. And I just said, I don't want to do a blog. I just, fought and fought and fought. And she goes, it's so easy, just, go out and do it. And I tend to be a very personal, very private person. And so for me to use those mediums was really an interesting dilemma, because I do tend to like to keep my life private. And she was, sat there at breakfast and convinced me that I could still be private and still share my work, and that sharing my work was important because that's my business. And it's also, we like, as artists, we do like to share our work. So I went home that day and I did go online, and I have had a blog ever since. And so it's, Ravenspeak Quilts at blogspot.com, and I have really had a lot of fun. And now this has caused some other friends, including that one, to tease me incessantly about the fact that I said I would never blog. So never say never. And then the other parts that I had joined Facebook and really didn't find that I got what I needed from it. When Twitter came along, I was again trying to, it seemed kind of silly. What are you going to say in 140 characters? But you know something? It really is nice to know that my friend in Connecticut is having coffee at the same time I'm having coffee in the morning sometimes. Sometimes it's just good to know that there's 6 of us out there that I follow that are all going for that first cup of coffee or the second and getting started on their day. Really met some interesting people. I say I met them, but I really haven't met them. I've really just been chatting with them. And they're from all over the world. And it's fun to see the art happening all over the world. It's fun to see what's happening, you know, not only in the quilt art world, but in, you know, the general art world, and then, you know, sharing other things, including daily lives and sometimes even that cup of coffee in the morning. Well, I think by saying that the Twitter or a blog is impacted my colleagues is the most important thing, because the more you're known to other artists and other colleagues, including there's people out there that are curators, and there's people out there that are putting together exhibitions, and it really has opened doors that might not have been. And when I go out and when I have an exhibition, or I've decided this year to open up my studio for 1 class per month in my studio, and it's only for 4 students, and it's only 1 time a month, and it's offered me a way to get that word out there. Like I had mentioned earlier that I have pieces in Houston and pieces in California. Well, I can actually go out there, and was chatting with people that are going to Houston or going to those shows, and they can go see it. And I've had people send me pictures. So they've gone to see him and sent me pictures of, you know, when they were recently in Pennsylvania. Somebody went to the show and took pictures and sent them back to me. So it makes the world smaller, and it's important, I think, to be known in terms of, you know, to the colleagues, in terms of the business side, but it's fun just as the artist, you know, as well. I think new things are always happening in my work. And I think that because of the book being so much focused on the method of fast piece applique, and the fact that it was put out as a landscape book, has made the landscapes more popular, and seemingly more of a need to stay a little bit into that venue, especially when I'm teaching, because when you're teaching from a recent book, you do, you know, tend to teach what you what you had written about a couple of years ago, which can be sometimes a little, you know, you've already moved on to something else. But that's okay, because I never get sick of the landscapes, and I never get sick of putting colors together to create wonderful landscapes and seeing them. So so that's not been too much of a problem. But the themes have definitely changed, and I've been moving on to some other interesting themes in my own work. A new series that I have just started is called Ebb and Flow, and it's just a lot more organic and much more close up and organic, and I'm having a great time. And it goes back to your question of how do you make it fit. So I had 3 pieces that were due for an exhibit, so the 3 pieces are actually going to be, you know, that I'm working on the series that I get to put into something else. So they will be new. You know, I think when you're out there as an artist and you're paying attention to almost anything, that things strike you. I had gone back recently and looked through some sketchbooks, and I had looked through some photos that I had recently taken on a couple of trips as I was traveling, and you know, there's a theme of rocks and riverbeds and hills that are just really incorporated in within the sketching and the photos being taken. And so it just was kind of a natural, you know, I'm going to use the word flow here and there's no pun, but the flow, a natural flow into that theme coming out in what I wanted to do in the quilts. And so really, and in addition to the ebb and the flow of the fabrics and just the general designs, there's also an ebb and flow to the embellishments I use, because I'm really into embellishments. And so there's been some growth in terms of how I fabricate different embellishments out of wools and that type of thing. And the ebb and the flow really is just really well suited to utilize those types of things. Oh, that's just a terrible question. What is an embellishment? An embellishment is something that is added on top of something else to give it a decorative quality. That's probably a very lame definition of an
Well,
embellishment.
give
It
us
makes
some.
something special, something that's added on to what is to make it special in some way. And so there can be a zillion different ways to embellish. If you think about the clothing that you're wearing at this moment, and it may have stickers on it, or it may have buttons on it, and it could be a decorative element, it could be a utilitarian element. Embellishments tend to lean more towards the decorative aspect of it. So the buttons might not be considered an embellishment when you're just using them to button up your shirt. But if you added a whole lot of buttons like they do in the Pacific Northwest, when the Indians and the Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest make the button blankets, and they use buttons to create designs. Okay, that takes it from the utilitarian and creates its meaning for them as well. But it's also an embellishment. It makes something decorative, and it makes it more meaningful. And I think that's really the difference between, if you just use a button as an example of an embellishment. Embellishments I love to find embellishments. As a matter of fact, this year I went and I took some friends, and I was putting together a new lecture on embellishments. It's called the Embellishment Scavenger Hunt. And we literally did go on a scavenger hunt in LA for finding different embellishments. And we set out, we looked up all these places, some we knew, some we didn't, and we set off on a journey with our cameras. And everywhere we went into these incredible stores, and we said what we were doing, and they let us take pictures of just amazing things. And it's being open to what's around you. And I think when we travel, especially on vacation, we're always attracted to some of those little fun things that you might find. I mean, how many of us have picked up stones or shells when we're traveling? And all of those things can be made into embellishments. I don't really think of my work in terms of hopes and dreams for the work. I'd love to just be able to continue doing the work that I love to do, and have it be out there as what it is, because the more it's out there, the more it's accepted, the more I get to do what I love to do. And I think that's probably the biggest, I guess that's a hope and a dream. That's kind of the way I see it, but it's all the work. I actually do a lot of commission work, and it's really been a lot of fun to do the commission work, because people will send you pictures. I work basically from pictures a lot of times, and I'll take the pictures of their wonderful places that they've been to, or wonderful places that they experience. And I think I had the most interesting one though come up lately is that a couple had approached me that live in Arkansas, and they have the most incredible view of the mountains from their back patio. And she said, I'm going to take pictures and I'm going to send them to you. And she did. And she says, you can see the mountains and the hills, the rolling hills in the distance. And you can actually, there's a creek that runs, from one side to the other. But I have to tell you, they didn't come out in the pictures. That's the beauty of talking with somebody and giving them what they want in a quilt piece versus what they might actually see. Because, the hills are there when she sees it in her mind's eye, and the creek is there. And so, but in the pictures, they're really not there. What you see is a lot of trees. And I'm sure that the hills are, you just make out the hills in the distance in her pictures. And so it was really a lot of fun to work up the designs, knowing that in her heart she wanted what she wanted to see in the piece, and she was ecstatic. So working on commissions is really a big part of what I do, and one of the best parts too. So. When you're working on a commission piece, I actually have, a long time ago when I had decided to do commission pieces, I had come up with a fair amount. And when I do quilts, even when I'm selling pieces that I have made in general, there's kind of a formula in terms of what I use, in terms of how long something might take me, the fabrics and the cost of the materials, and I have actually worked up a contract that I feel comfortable with, and that's provided to the people that I do commissions for right up front, and so they know what they're asking me to do and what the costs are going to be in a general way, basically so much, so based on the size. I have had people change the size of a piece. They didn't, they wanted a piece, but maybe they didn't want it to be as big as they originally had thought it based on the pricing, but that's okay because they get what they want and they know that there's a value to it too. I think that's important that they understand that there is a value to it, and working up front with the contract is probably the best way that I have found to create a good situation between the artist and somebody who's commissioning me.